Hello and welcome. So today I'm going to teach you how to do these two deaths. You'll notice that the project behind is from the parallax scrolling tutorial. I've changed it a little bit, so we'll go over that now and then get into the tutorial. So let's get into it. So you'll notice that the camera is actually attached to the player. Now this is going to have issues when we restart. It'll cause some sort of flashing. We don't want that, so what I'm going to do is change the camera to an auto load and then make that auto load look for the player and follow the player. So we're going to do that now. So what I'm going to do in my project is I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to save the branch as a scene. I'm going to put that into my objects as camera 2D. Once that's done, we're going to go to our project settings. We're going to go to our auto load. We're going to look for our camera 2D. Open it, and then we're going to attach it, make sure singleton is enabled. This means that the camera is always present no matter where we are in the project. Remove the camera from the player. Now we're going to open the camera. And you'll notice that the camera now will be in space, it won't move around, so we're going to change that. We're going to add in a new script. We'll put that in our scripts. So here we're going to define a new var, which is going to be the player, and it's going to be in the kinematic body, which the player is. On ready, we're going to set that var to the return player. And what's going to happen is we're going to look for the player in the group's player. If we find it, we return I. If we don't, we'll return null. In the player process, what we'll do is, if the player isn't null, it means we found it, then we want to make sure the camera is following the player's position. Else, we're going to make sure we're looking for the player still. Also, it's really vital that we make sure the player is in the group player. Go to your player, and we're going to go to our groups, and we're going to put in player here. So when the player dies, you'll notice that we want to animate the death, and then after 2-3 seconds, we restart. So we're going to focus on that now. So what we want you to do is make a new node. We'll just make a normal node. Call this game. I'm going to attach a script. I'll copy and paste the code in. And what this is going to do is going to look for a timer, which I've not put in, so let me do that now. Put a timer in. Brilliant. Make sure that is on one shot, because we don't want that to keep on repeating, because this is going to be an auto load, so it'll always be present. So go to our signals, go to your timeout. Make sure it's on game, connect, and as you can see, this icon means that the signal is now connected. And what's going to happen is somewhere else in the code, we're going to call the game, we're going to call the timer, and then we're going to say 2 seconds. Once that happens, we'll reload this scene. I'm going to put it in here, and what we're going to do while we're here is go to our project settings, do the same thing again in your auto load. We're going to look for game, put it in, add it, and make sure it's enabled. Brilliant. That will always be active now. So our first def, we're going to do the saw def, so let's do that now. We're going to make the saw object, so I want you to start a new node, other node, area 2D. We're going to put in an animated sprite. We're going to put in a collision shape, and let's see an animated player, animation player. So let's put in the animated sprites first. We're going to go inspector, frames, new sprite frames, click that. Default is going to be the big O. So let's keep on putting our animations in. We've got one more, and we'll just call this blood. Let's put in the blood saw. We're going to go to animation. We're going to put this back to default. Now our collision shape, obviously we want our circle. Grow it to how big you want it. I want it about this big. So we're going to go to animation, new animation, and I'm just going to call this rotate. Add in the property. I'm going to go area 2D, so we want the whole thing to rotate. Make sure you do the area 2D and not the animated sprite. Look for rotation degrees, and then I'm going to put in insert key, go to 1, insert key again, and on 1 we're going to go to 360. So make sure you click this, which means it will play upon load, which we want, and also we want it to repeat. So that's a little bit slow for me, so I'm going to make it 0.5, and we'll change the animation length to 0.5. That's much quicker, that's what I want, I'm happy with that. Change this area, I'm just going to saw, save it, we're going to put in objects as saw. So we need a script. Player saw def is actually going to be a sprite with some blood particles on it, so we're going to do that in a moment. But you'll also see that we've got an Annie pointing to the animated sprite, and what's going to happen is when we touch the player, we're going to change it to the blood sprite. But first we're going to focus on the player saw def. So I want you to go and make a new node, and it's going to be a sprite. I'm actually going to use the jump, and I'm going to use this one, and I'm just going to put it in like this. Obviously we need some blood particles on there, so let's do that now. In fact, let's call this dead player saw, so we know what we're working with, and added particles. I'm just going to use 8,000, which is a lot. lifetime of 4, speed of 4, drawing, this is important, make sure local chords are off, process materials, new particle materials, we're going to go to our trail, I'm going to change this to 10, mission shape, I'm going to change this to a box, and make this 8, change direction to -1, change the gravity to 0, initial velocity, so just look for a value that you like. Now if I go to the scale, I'm going to change this to 0.4, I'm going to have this random to 1, in fact we're going to use a gradient texture, click on that, and then we're going to do a new gradient, make it red, click around about here, you can make it a little bit more darker, and finally we can go here and go to your alpha, which will fade it out. So that's it for our dead player saw, so let's save that in our objects. Now if we go back to saw, you'll notice that we've got this variable here from our exported vars, so we're going to look for it, so we'll go to load, objects, and we're going to put in the dead player here. Now let's go back to our scripts. We want to detect when the player touches the saw, so we're going to go to the area 2D, we're going to go to the node, signals, and we're going to look for our body, because a kinematic body is a body. Body entered, so we're going to look for when the body enters this shape, connect it. What we're going to do is check that the body that just collided is inside the group players. If it's not, then we return, it means we won't do this code underneath. However, if it is, this code will be executed, so we want to hide the player, we want to set the player physics off. Also you'll notice game timer dot start, and I'm going to say 2 seconds. So what's going to happen is we're going to get the game, which is an auto load, so we know it's in the background. We're going to get the timer of that, and we're going to start it for 2 seconds. After 2 seconds we're going to restart the scene. Do def animation function, make a new var, and it's going to be an instance of that player def, which is this object. We're then going to change the sprite of the saw to the blood sprite. Then we're going to add child, which means we're going to attach it to the saw. And what we're going to do is we're going to move that back by 35 pixels. And you might be wondering why we're doing this, because if you don't, the saw center is in the middle, so we don't want the player to be in the middle, we want it to be on the outside. Let's put the saw into the project. And as you can see, we run into the saw, restarts. So it's quite a gruesome death. Now this is the easier one, the swing blade is a little bit harder, so let's go and do that now. So let's make the swing blade. We're going to put in an area 2D. Now this time, instead of using a shape, we're going to use a polygon. So attach collision polygon 2D. Animated sprite, and also an animation player. We're going to go to our frames, new sprite frames, default, look for our swing blade, the default, and then we're going to make a new one. We're going to call this blood, like the saw one, and put blood in. Default to default. Put in our snap grid, which is up here. I'm going to change this to 1, 1. So if I go to configure snap, 1, 1, okay, brilliant. Now what I want you to do is just move it across about here. Now this is our center point, however it still thinks it's here, so press V here. What that means is if we rotate now, it rotates around that axis. Click on the collision shape 2D. I'm going to quickly just put some points down, and you do that just by left clicking. It's a little bit rough, but it doesn't matter, it's just a tutorial. And then finally on the last one, you'll see that it's come together. Now it's hard to see, you can just move the animation sprite above it so we can actually see what's going on here. If you right click, you can left click, sorry, you can actually put some more points in. I'm going to change this to swing blade. Now we're going to use the animation player to swing the blade. This is going to be a little bit different, so I want to create a new animation, and call it swing. I'm going to change this to 3 and add track. Now instead of using property track, it's really important that you use Bezier curve, and the reason for this is we can't use linear interpolation on a swing blade. It doesn't look normal. Swing blade, okay. Rotation degrees, we're going to put in 3 points. So insert key here at 1.5 again, and at 3. So I'm going to put some values in that I already know that work. I'm going to left click here, and you can see the values here. I'm going to change this to -0.8 and this to 0.8. Now I'm going to click on the 1.5 left click, and this is going to be 180 degrees. And same again, minus 0.8, 0.8. And on the very last one, it's just going to duplicate the first. So yeah, minus 0.8, 0.8. Now if I press play, it should work. Brilliant. What we want to do is keep this looping and autoplay it on load. So let's attach a script to the swing blade. I'll put our variables in. And you'll see like the saw blade, but instead of having one, we've got two. So we're going to have a body and we're going to have a head, and the head's going to be removed. So it has to be two separate objects. We're going to have a has kill. Just this will stop a death loop, and animation player, so we can set that to bloody. So what we're going to do is make the player body and player head. So new node, and this time we're going to make a rigid body. So with a rigid body, we can add physics to it, and it'll make a nice little effect when the head lands on the floor. It'll keep on rolling. We're going to add in a sprite, collision shape, and particles. Make sure our collision shape is our circle. And for the particles, I'm going to use 80. So go down to drawing, this is important. We're going to have local chords off. Go to process material, we want a new particles material. Emission shape, I'm just going to use a sphere. Keep it as 1, and we're going to move down the particles. Let's just move it so it looks like it's coming out of the neck, about there. The gravity to 0. Make sure the direction is X is 0, Y is 1. Spread, I'm going to make the spread a little bit less. Gravity is off. Velocity, this is how fast we want it to squirt down. I'm going to just make it about here and add a little bit more random. Now let's make it look like blood. New gradient, click one here, make sure this is red. It should be red, but we're going to do the alpha to 0, and you can see it fades out. I'm going to save this into my objects as player head. When the other node, you want a sprite. I've got the player body here, so we're going to drag it in. Now what I want you to do is look for the foot. I want to rotate around this axis, so we're going to press V. Brilliant. Now we're going to put in particles. This is going to be the blood from the neck. Add a new child, and we want animation player, and this is going to rotate the player so he lands on his stomach after he dies. You'll notice that the particles are down here. We just want to move them up around about here for the neck. Now I'm going to focus on the animation before the blood squirt, so let's do that now. Animation player, and we'll just call this fall. Now we're going to go to the add track. We're going to go Bezier curve. Once again, this is important you do it this way. Go to your sprite, and we're going to look for rotation degrees. We're going to put in a keyframe here and one at 1. So I'm just going to have this looping and playing just so we can see what's going on. I want to change this to 90. As you see, it falls down really robotic. So what we can do is open this Bezier curve by this icon here and move this up a little bit. There you go. I mean, maybe a little bit more violent on the fall. Yeah. So now we've got the animation sorted out, we can focus on the blood squirting. So I'm going to put this back to how it was. We're going to have this on autoplay on load. We're not going to have it on repeat because we want it to fall over once and not fall over it multiple times. Go to your particles 2D. We're going to change this to say 80. Lifetime 0.3. Explosiveness 0.6. Drawing local chords off. And then our process material, we want a particles material. Emission shape, let's have a sphere again. Direction -1. Direction -1 on the Y. 0 on the X. Let's put the spread down a little bit. We're going to turn gravity off and we'll put initial velocity on. So let's change initial velocity to about here. You keep messing around with these variables, you'll find something you like. I'll try and be a bit quicker. And once again, like before, we're just going to make it look like blood, so I'm going to skip through this bit. On the Z-axis, I'm actually going to just put it so it looks like it's coming in from the player, because if it's in front, it just looks a bit weird. Brilliant, now we want to save this into our objects. Make sure that we change this to player body, and then we're going to save it into our game objects. Now we've got the player head and the player body for the swing blade death animation. We're going to focus on the script. You'll notice that we've got to put these in, so let's do that now. Player head goes to player head, player body goes to player body. Click your swing blade, go to your node, go to your signals, and like with the saw, we're going to make sure that it's body entered. Make sure it's on the swing blade, connect, there we go. So what happens here is that when the player touches the swing blade, this function will execute. So you notice a little error here. It's just looking for a function we've not done yet, but I'll get to that. So first of all, what's going to happen is we're going to check that the body, which should be the player, like the saw, we'll do that same code. If the body isn't in the player group, it's not the player, so do not do this code. We're also going to check, has it been killed? Because if the swing blade swings away and back in, it can retouch the player and you'll get 2 deaths. However, none of this has happened. We want to then hide the body. We want to check the physics to false, and I didn't explain it before, but all that's going to do is just make the player invisible and you can't move him around, so it's just like he's not there, and this will stop the camera from moving around because the camera has to look for the player. Then we're going to get the game auto load, get the timer, set it to 2, and what I'll do is gives us 2 seconds to look at the animation and then it'll restart. Now we want to do the death animation and we'll pass in the player through. As you can see, it's quite a lengthy function, so I'll go over it now. We'll make an instance of the player head and the player body. Once they've been created, we're gonna include them into the game tree, and we're gonna get the node, we're gonna get the root and the main, which is this node here, and we're gonna add the child, we'll add the body, and then we'll do the same again to the head. I use call defer, and the reason is because there's potential errors if we don't do that. What can happen is sometimes it takes a while for it to come inside the tree, and if you try to access it, you'll get an error. So this will make sure that that happens before you can access it. Then, like with the saw, we're going to change the animation of the swing blade to blood. That's going to make sure that the head location is where the player location was. We're then going to add an impulse, which is like a force. Just going to make sure that it shoots it up, left or right randomly. Add a little bit of rotation, and we're going to make sure it's just a little tiny bit of to the left or to the right. The reason I've done lots of random here is that each death looks a little bit different, just add some variety. Then with the player body, we make sure that it matches where the old player was. We then change the X and Y by a little bit, and the reason I've done that is, if you remember, in player body we messed around with the start location, so I've moved it back 6 and 18 up. This will ensure that the dead body matches up perfectly where the old player was. We'll then check that if the player was facing to the right, that the dead body is facing to the right, and if it was to the left, it'll face to the left. Finally, after all that's done, we do has killed equals true, and this just stops multiple animations. If we save this, play, it should work. As you can see, it's working on the saw, and if we go to hit, brilliant. If I get hit again, you see it goes left or right randomly. However, you'll notice there's one issue. If I jump, that doesn't look natural. He should fall, right? So what we can do is make this fall, and that'll conclude the end of the tutorial. So let's do it now. So we want to go to our player body, and we want to put a raycast on. However, you'll notice that if we put the raycast on, what's going to happen is the raycast will be rotated too. We don't want that. So to avoid that, I'm going to make a new node and just call it just a node 2D. We'll call this player body. Make this the root. Now if you go to the animation player, you'll notice if we press play, it'll still work, but the player body will stay here rather than there. That's great, so we can attach the raycast to this player body, which we'll do now. Add a raycast, put the animation back to how it was, ray to about here, make sure that the ray is actually enabled, and I'm going to turn the collision mask off here and on to player 2. You might be wondering why I'm doing that. Well, because the player doesn't disappear, you still collide with that player. So I can use collision masks to make sure that doesn't happen. So that's on player 2 and that's the floor. Let's go back to the main just to see that. So if we go to the floor, you'll notice, click on it, and sure enough, it's on layer 2 and on mask 2 as well. I'm going to change this to say 2. So when we go to our animation player and press it, you'll notice that it's still working. You might wonder why we're doing this. Well, if we're in the air, I want to check that is this touching the ground. If it isn't, we're going to move this down so it looks like he's falling rather than being stuck in the air. So on your player body, we're going to attach a script. I'm going to put in some code. So these two variables, what we're going to have is ground ray is going to be connected to our raycast. In fact, let's call that ground ray. And there you see it's connected. Max speed, that's our max falling speed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, is the ground ray is colliding? If it's not, by using the exclamation mark, then we know that there's nothing below us. That means we want to add to the Y position of the dead body, and we'll just lerp it so it doesn't fall too linear. So right now we will have to change a little bit of code because we've just changed a type. So we can go to the swing blade. So in swing blade, you notice right at the bottom, straight away, P body flip H. Now this is a variable of the animated sprite or a sprite. However, we're now calling it from a node 2D, so that doesn't exist. So what we're going to have to do is just change this to get node. Get node, and we want to make sure that we use the right variable name. So we go to here, it's called player body. So let's go back, save this, and now if we press play, let's see what. So you'll notice now it falls, it works, it's great. However, you'll notice there's another bug. So what's going on there? Well, what's changed here is that we've got our P body. You notice that the origin point is at its foot. However, it's been changed because now the origin point is here, which is the default. So that's great. So we can go to our swing blade, go to the script, and we don't need this anymore. So I just comment these out. Now you'll notice that when he dies, he falls over, and when he dies in the air, he falls down. What's happening before is because the origin point was different. We was moving the player, so we just moved the player below the actual surface, so he was falling through the floor. That concludes the tutorial. I had fun doing this one, and I'll look forward to seeing the next one. Bye bye.